So I came across this road sign a while ago, and what first struck me about this sign was how it communicated in a sort of universal language. No words, just images, shapes and colours. Well, firstly, it's a warning. Yellow and black is a widespread colour scheme for danger. The speed bump is generally well understood and it tells you to slow down. Then the silhouette of the bird, well, this tells you to expect wildlife on the road ahead. And it didn't specify a scale, so I don't know if hitting this thing would result in one less bird or one less car, but either way, the message was clear. Danger ahead, slow down, wildlife in road. Now I mention it here because like the majority of people, I simply saw a road sign. But somebody else though took a different view. They saw potential. They stopped their car and they got their pen out and they added the word before to the lower sign. Now you might see where this is going. They added the word after to the top of the sign and modified the speed bump a little, which arguably is a better sign. But what is it that makes the majority of us see the functional road sign while others see the makings of something else? This is creativity, and it is a key principle in marketing theory. Now, creativity as a concept, it's only existed in our modern sense since the 15th century and the Renaissance. Before that, the belief was that individuals could discover or make things, but all creation was divine. It wasn't the business of mere mortals to come up with new ideas. And it wasn't until the Enlightenment in the 18th century that the idea of creativity linked to the concept of human imagination became more mainstream. Now, even though humans had been creative since our ancestors sharpened stone tools or made the wheel or invented fire, we've only recognized and studied creativity relatively recently. So what makes some people creative? Can anybody learn to be creative, or is it the preserve of a few gifted individuals? Researchers have been looking for the creative spark for years. Are creative brains made differently? Is there a measurable physiological difference? Well, the answer appears to be no. Even with the most recent advances in fMRI and brain imaging, no meaningful, discernible difference has yet been identified. It appears that whatever creativity is, it probably isn't a hardware issue. It's the software. It's not how our brains are built, it's how they're programmed. And this is good news, because while it is currently impossible to build a brain, it is possible to some extent to reprogram one. We just have to know what to do. Now, most people recognize that children are generally more imaginative and creative than adults. In a 1968 study by George Land and Beth Jarman, 1,600 5-year-olds were tested for something called divergent thinking, which is a key component of creativity. And a massive 98% of 5-year-olds showed the highest levels, almost genius levels of divergent thinking. At age 8 to 10, only 32% were at this level. At 15, it was 10%, and by the time we got to 25 and adulthood, it dropped to 2%. And this study is often referred to highlight how we stifle creativity through our formal education system. And while that might be part of the answer, it's mostly because of a natural biological process called synaptic pruning. Now, a baby's brain has around 90 to 100 billion neurons, which is pretty much the same as an adult brain, but it's only about 30% of the mass. The mass that is added to the brain as the baby grows is not new neurons, it's mainly down to a process called myelination, where neurons get coated with a fatty substance called myelin to help them transmit information more efficiently. And it's also partly down to the growth in synaptic connections. Synapses are what connects individual neurons to create a neural network, to make a working brain. And at birth, the brain has around 2,500 synapses per neuron. But by age 3, it's around 15,000 per neuron. But that's as good as it gets. At 3 years old, the child's brain is pretty close to its full adult size. But from that point, these massive neural networks start to decline through to adulthood, when we end up with about 7,000 synapses per neuron. Those connections that are used frequently get strengthened and preserved, while those not used repeatedly or often enough get deleted through this process of synaptic pruning. Our thinking becomes less divergent as we grow into adulthood, and we converge onto our particular worldview. Now, neuroscientists like to say what fires together wires together. The more we use neural circuits, the stronger they become. So our knowledge, our skills, our abilities, our expertise all get strengthened. We get set in our ways, but we also downgrade and delete those circuits that we rarely use. Thorstein Veblen, an economist and sociologist, explored this concept in the early 20th century with the notion of trained incapacity, how increased knowledge in one area creates what he called a widening field of ignorance in others. The more specialized we become, the more ignorant we become. And this is the challenge of creativity in adults. How do we wake up those connections that we rarely use? And how do we bypass that hardwired certainty that we are both blessed and cursed with? So here are 5 principles that you can use. Principle 1, cast your net wide. Be curious, collect trivia. Pioneers in the study of creativity acknowledge this principle. Ellis Paul Torrance in 1963 identified that curiosity is a key factor in enhancing creativity. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi in 1992 said, in order to make creative contributions, people have to be unusually curious. Creative people tend to have interests in many things. They don't spend all their time on one subject. They're intellectual magpies. Creativity is about connections. The wider your range of unrelated knowledge, the more likely it is that you will make a random connection. And if this just isn't you, if you're not this type of person, then don't despair. Just make sure that you network with a wide range of people outside of your specialization. Invite diversity into your meetings. Ask a biologist, an engineer, a songwriter, a historian, and so on. Be the hub of an eclectic wheel of knowledge. Just be curious. Principle 2, priming the mind. You know how sometimes you feel really creative? Your mind is open to possibilities, you're in the zone. Now, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who I mentioned earlier, is perhaps best known in the field of creativity for his work on flow, a sort of peak state that we've all experienced where you are totally absorbed and immersed in the task at hand and exclude everything else. You lose track of time, you don't get hungry, you forget about everything else, your whole being is involved. Now, achieving this state of flow and priming your brain in preparation is crucial for creativity, yet it's often overlooked. If you put a bunch of executives into a room with flip charts and post-it notes and say, right, let's brainstorm, well, you might be setting yourself up for failure. In a recent session I held in South America, we spent nearly the whole day priming the team before we got to the creative stuff. We put as much effort into getting the right mental state as we did actually coming up with ideas. Now, we'll get to methods for priming in the classroom or a future video, but be aware of the principle. If you haven't primed your mind for creativity, you'll be like a blacksmith hammering on cold iron. A lot of effort, but with little effect. Principle 3 is to reframe. So while priming your mind for creativity and creative thought is relatively easy, reframing your perspective is hard. If there's one trait that distinguishes naturally creative people from those of us who have to work at it, it's this ability to see things differently to how everybody else sees them. Think of the road sign at the beginning of this video. Now, sociologist Gregory Bateson coined the term framing in his 1972 book, Steps to an Ecology of Mind. as a description of the way we structure and organize our worldview. Frames are built on underlying structures of beliefs, values, and experience, so they're deep rooted and enduring. Paul Watzlawick, John Weakland, and Richard Fish, in their book, Principles of Problem Formation and Resolution, described reframing as to change the conceptual or emotional setting or viewpoint in relation to how a situation is experienced, and to place it in another frame which fits the facts of the situation equally well but changes its entire meaning. Well, the short version of that is to develop and practice the art of asking, what if? What if is the most powerful question in reframing. Principle 4, play. If there's one thing likely to get a bunch of stressed executives and managers to find their inner creative, it's playing. When you play, you stimulate your inner child. You're free to make stuff up. Even within the rules of structured play, you have degrees of freedom. When we play, we worry less about consequences. We explore. We have fun. So address your challenges in terms of a game. Have teams build prototypes with card and material and stickers. Shoot an amusing 5-minute video imagining your customer's worst ever experience or best ever experience. Sit on the floor, draw, paint, dance, sing, create a scrapbook and tell stories. Creativity is about letting go and having fun. Principle 5 is incubate. Often the most critical part of creativity is to forget about it. Let time go by as you occupy your mind doing something else. Give no conscious thought to your creative challenge at all. Your subconscious is where most eureka moments come from, and it needs time and space. It's why you often have your best ideas first thing in the morning after a good night's sleep, or in the shower while you're singing Bohemian Rhapsody. Now, we've all experienced something like this. Maybe you've been stuck on a particular problem for a long time and you go and do something else. When you return to the problem, the answer pops into your head instantly. And this is the power of incubation, and it's a key last step in creativity. Research shows that the best approach is to occupy your mind with an unrelated task that takes a lot of concentration and mental effort, sort of uses a large part of your cognitive bandwidth. So have you had a good session of idea generation and reframing and playing? Then go and do a Sudoku puzzle, or learn how to play a simple tune on a piano, or memorize a poem, or just go for a long walk and take in your surroundings. Not only should you not expect instant results from your creative efforts, you should plan for a period of incubation and artificially construct a mentally taxing diversion to let the subconscious work its magic. In a recent session, I had 25 people spend 3 hours learning to become a marching samba band with drums and whistles and everything, which was a lot of fun. But when we got back to the challenge we'd been working on before, the solutions, they started to come thick and fast. Everybody has creative ability. We all possess a creative supercomputer between our ears. You just need to learn how to switch it on. So subscribe or follow below to get future videos, or get in touch if you have any questions.